Seychelles Airport, 1981. Tracer bullets light up the night sky as a mortar shell explodes nearby, showering you with dirt. You are a South African mercenary trying to overthrow the government of the Seychelles. But it has all gone very wrong. The main road to the airport has been blocked, but an armoured car approaches off-road, its machine gun looking for targets. Thankfully, its wheels sink into the soft sand. Soon, it is completely stuck, unable to move forward or backwards. Taking advantage, you race over and surround it with your fellow mercenaries. Slapping mud over its periscope to blind the crew, you stand on top, knock on the closed turret and yell, "Come out, with your hands up!" No response. Again you yell, "Come out, or we'll burn you out with petrol." Still no response. Quickly, you create a Molotov cocktail. Turning to your comrades, you shout, "Someone give me a light." It's only as they stare blankly back at you that you realise none of the team actually smoke. No one has a lighter. The leader of this whole operation, Mike Hoare, knocks on the turret and says, "Sorry for the delay, chaps. Hang on a bit. We're going to fetch some matches." As he saunters off towards the terminal, you stare at him with disbelief. This Brit is really crazy. I'm your host, James Barton. Welcome to Forgotten Wars.
This country is at war with Germany.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
Eagle 1, first strike, you have permission to engage the target.
In the first few hours after our servicemen went to the rescue of young Americans and of democracy in Grenada,
Damals uns ausgebildet. Wollen diese 4 Jahre nützen.
Hello everyone, welcome to the show. In today's world, if you say the word mercenary, it brings to mind either the thugs of the former Wagner group or brawny security contractors in dark sunglasses. Yet back in the Cold War, it was very different. Mercenaries became household names, famous for their dark glamour, eccentricity, and often crazy stunts. Even among these colourful personalities, one man always stood out. The subject of today's episode, Mad Mike Hoare. Thomas Michael Hoare was truly a product of the British Empire in its last years. Born, appropriately enough on St. Patrick's Day, to Irish parents in 1919, he spent most of his early life in India. Sent back to Britain to start school, already he was showing signs of a lust for adventure. His hero was Sir Francis Drake, and he loved reading about explorers and warfare. When World War II started, he signed up and fought bravely in Burma against the Japanese. He would later say it was one of the happiest times of his life. Returning to London to become, of all things, a chartered accountant, he was soon bored to death. He immigrated to Durban in South Africa to become a small businessman with a sideline in exciting adventures. He drove a motorcycle from Cape Town to Cairo, sought the rumoured lost city of the Kalahari in the Kalahari Desert, and ran safaris. Yet still, he was deeply bored with life. Like so many veterans, he longed for the excitement and purpose he had experienced in war. Little did he know that he would soon get an opportunity to fight again. During his travels, he met a CIA agent who was deeply involved in the ongoing troubles in the former Belgian Congo. The standards of behaviour by the colonial powers in Africa had never been particularly high, but even by this low bar, the Belgian Congo had a sinister reputation. Originally a private fiefdom created by King Leopold II of Belgium, it was meant to be a humanitarian project. Instead, it became a hellhole, where native Africans were forced into virtual slavery to collect rubber and ivory. If they didn't provide enough or annoyed Leopold's men, they had their hands chopped off as punishment. When the truth came out, it started such a fire show of public condemnation, as well as inspiring Joseph Conrad's famous novel Heart of Darkness, that Leopold was forced to hand over the Congo to the Belgian state. By 1959, the winds of change were blowing through Africa. Even the Congo wasn't immune. After bloody anti-colonial riots, Belgium rushed the Congo to independence in just 6 months, cynically planning to keep on ruling behind the scenes. The Congo only had 2 black doctors, less than a dozen black college graduates, and 2 just promoted black army lieutenants. Surely, the Belgians thought, the newly independent state would be reliant under former white administrators for decades to come. They were in for a shock. At an officer training event, a Belgian wrote on a blackboard, "Before independence equals after independence," and then said, "Everything will remain the same." This didn't go down well. The army went into revolt. The lucky Belgian officers were just beaten up. The unlucky ones were strung up instead. The Congo disintegrated into army mutinies, riots, massacres, rape and pillage. Things became so bad that famously a BBC reporter asked a group of refugee Belgian women, "Has anyone here been raped, speaks English, and wants to go on the radio about it?" Well done for the sensitivity there, BBC. Well done indeed. In the midst of all this chaos, the Congo's richest region, Katanga, tried to succeed. Katanga was one of the greatest treasure houses in all of Africa, filled with copper, cobalt, uranium and gemstones. There was no way the new Congolese government, led by Patrice Lumumba, could let it become independent. Lumumba's much longer full name meant heir of the cursed. It was appropriate, as both himself and the Congo under his rule would be extremely unlucky. First, he called in the United Nations to stop Katanga succeeding, but even though they sent troops, they did little to force it back into the fold. In desperation, Lumumba turned to the Soviet Union for aid. With massive amounts of support from the Eastern Bloc, his forces began to make progress in recapturing Katanga. But he hadn't reckoned with a wild card. Katanga's would-be president, Moise Tshombe, hired white mercenaries to defend his new state. Hoare, inspired by his CIA friend Don Rickard's claims that communism was about to take over Africa with Lumumba in the Red Vanguard. Let's take a look at these soldiers of fortune. Given the nickname locally of Les Affreux, or the Horrible Ones, they got $300 a month, plus all they could loot while on campaign. Many were former French soldiers disillusioned with Charles de Gaulle giving independence to Algeria, such as Major René Foulx, notorious for torturing Algerians during their war to drive out the French. For them, it was about continuing the fight against communism in Africa, while also hiding from treason charges back home in France. They became infamous for threatening to shoot anyone taking pictures of them. Others were from the white community in Katanga, shifting between running plantations or local businesses to putting on camouflage and fighting in the bush. The rest were mainly South Africans and Rhodesians, more interested in adventure and loot than anything else. One South African monsieur boasted that he had joined up for plenty of lolly and plenty of fun. For my non-English listeners, lolly means money in English slang. Another boasted of looting United Nations supply depots and living like a king on the food, drink and valuables he found there. As Hoare himself said, "You can't win a war with choir boys." They were effective, though, stopping the Congolese offensive in its tracks and even holding off the UN as well. Hoare became a legend after running a truck convoy 840 miles through hostile jungle to resupply a rebel garrison. No sooner had he arrived than he found out the United Nations peacekeepers had orders to arrest all mercenaries. Outwitting his pursuers, Hoare led his men to safety. A humiliated Lumumba was overthrown in a coup by the military and later killed in mysterious circumstances, most likely with the help of the Belgians and the CIA. With Lumumba gone and the Soviets sent packing, American pressure ensured Katanga rejoined the Congo. As Chombe went into exile in Madrid, Hoare must have assumed his mercenary days were now over, but in fact they had only just begun. He had made a name for himself now and had plenty of contacts in that world. Soon there would be a far larger and more brutal war to fight. Lumumba's shadow after his martyrdom continued to haunt the new nation. His supporters rose up to get revenge and soon turned the eastern Congo into a bloody war zone. They called themselves the Simbas, Swahili for lions. Most had never held a firearm before. Their main weapons were bows, spears, machetes, and the occasional handmade gun. They believed that by chanting their leader's name in battle and drinking a concoction called daga, bullets would turn into water in mid-air. Daga was made up of an appetizing mixture of alcohol, marijuana, and the pureed testicles of their enemies. Backed by the Soviet Union and the more radical African states such as Sudan and Tanzania, they slowly became better armed and began to overrun the demoralized and incompetent Congolese army. Morale was so bad among the government forces that many times they fled without even firing their guns. You are a Congolese soldier guarding a checkpoint in Stanleyville, and you can feel the fear in the city. It is so thick, you could probably cut it with a knife. The Simbas are approaching the city. Legend has it that bullets cannot harm them. How can you fight such men? All of a sudden, you hear screaming and shouting from up the road. Hundreds of your fellow soldiers are fleeing, abandoning their weapons, and trying to escape. Your officer shouts at them, "Tell me what has happened! Stop running, you fools!" He orders you to fire into the air. But this makes no difference to the terrified men. Finally, he grabs one and slaps him. What is going on? The Simbas! They have entered the city! Finally, the human wave begins to lessen. Only a few stragglers now drift past. All of you are very unnerved now. Is there anybody left apart from you to defend this city? You turn around to talk to your officer, but he's already running down the street to join the rest. Then, around the corner, comes the Simbas. They don't look fearsome. They are only carrying spears and machetes. A shaman walks in front, chanting and waving a palm branch. You are expecting an army, but you can only see 10 men. Then they spot you. The shaman points with his stick as they charge towards the checkpoint. Something breaks inside of you. Dropping your gun, you flee. Stanleyville was a major city in the Congo, with 1,500 defenders. It fell without a shot being fired to 40 men armed only with spears and machetes, led by 2 shamans. Such was the state of the Congolese army. What came next was horrifying. Mass killings on an epic scale of anyone who could be considered westernized. Doctors, policemen, nurses, bureaucrats, and even those wearing glasses were butchered horrifically in front of a statue of Lumumba in the main square. The worst of the lot were the jeunesse, or youth, gangs of ruthless street children who delighted in rape, flaying, burning, impalement, dismemberment, disembowelment, and even ritual cannibalism. In many ways, the Simbas were the pioneers of using child soldiers in Africa. As is usual with the Western media, little coverage was given to the Africans killed. Instead, they were more worried about the over 1,000 white hostages the Simbas had now taken. For the time being, the white hostages were worth more as live bargaining chips than as dead amusements. But no one knew how long that would last. With half the country under Simba control, Moise Chambe was suddenly brought back from exile and became the national leader. To appreciate just how bizarre this was, imagine Jefferson Davis being elected President of the United States because of Custer's defeat at the Little Bighorn. Congo was a wild place in the 60s, that's for sure. He'd been brought back precisely because he had connections to white mercenaries from his Katanga days. And now they were desperately needed. Hoare was headhunted to lead the fight back against the Simbas. He put an ad in local newspapers in South Africa and Rhodesia, offering employment with a difference for tremendous romantics. They must be physically fit, able to walk 20 miles a day, and be fond of combat. My local newspaper ads seemed quite boring in comparison. Soon he had 500 volunteers. Journalist David Reed would rather romantically describe them as, in another age, they would have found their calling on the Spanish Main. They would have fitted well into the ranks of the conditori, the hired soldiers who fought in Renaissance Europe, and they would have done themselves proud as gunfighters in the American Wild West. In reality, the newly named Commando Unit 5 was filled with drunks, drug addicts, hardcore criminals out for loot, a man with terminal cancer using the Congo to get it over with, and sadists, such as a Danish soldier who enjoyed boiling the heads of Simba rebels. Many Germans joined as well, with pasts that wouldn't bear much scrutiny. Among his officers were Siegfried Müller, who became infamous as Congo Müller for wearing his Iron Cross, complete with swastika, from World War II, and reminiscing fondly about Nazi Germany. Romanian Ferdinand Calistrat, who had served in Spain's Foreign Legion, nicknamed aptly the Bridegrooms of Death, and John Peters, who even Mad Mike Hoare considered as mad as a snake. He once killed a fellow mercenary over a bunk bed. It was a distinctly seedy group, made up of the flotsam and jetsam of the world, but Hoare insisted on old-school rules. They had to shave every day, wear proper uniforms, and attend a church parade every Sunday. This really sums up Hoare, a bizarre combination of outlaw, adventurer, and middle-class bank manager. Ever the trained accountant, he even gave them detailed contracts to sign. A 6-month tour for $120 a month, plus $12.50 each day in combat pay. It even had a carefully worked-out percentage formula for physical disabilities. 75% for a lost right arm, 60% for a left, moving down to 5% for a big toe, and 3% for a small toe. They were to be part of Operation Dragon Rouge, The mercenaries were to be the spearhead of an offensive to reach Stanleyville and rescue the hostages, along with Belgian paratroopers and quiet help from the US. The Congolese army would also provide support, but nobody was going to rely on them at this point. First, though, their target would be Albertville, where hundreds were being held hostage by the Simbas, led by an unpredictable 12-year-old. Though Albertville was poorly defended, the Congolese offensive to relieve it was going nowhere. Albertville was located on Lake Tanganyika, so Hoare began to wonder if an assault from the water can make up for the snail's pace of the land offensive. Seizing 16 small outboards, he asked for volunteers to come with him. There was very nearly a mutiny as a Belgian mercenary waved his rifle in Hoare's face and screamed that they would all drown. As cool as a cucumber, Hoare pulled out his pistol and belted the Belgian in the face with it. Standing over the moaning mercenary, he renewed his request for volunteers. Soon he was on his way with 20 men. After an eventful journey involving rough water, engine breakdowns, and an aborted attempt at landing under enemy gunfire, they reached the shore near Albertville. They approached the town as the morning sun rose over the horizon. A chilling backdrop of haunting calls and throbbing drumbeats warned the rebels that the mercenaries were coming. Hundreds of Simbas appeared, led by their 12-year-old commander, armed with spears, machetes, and a few rifles. And chanting their battle cry, they charged Hoare's men. They were no match for modern machine guns, however, especially when they realized the bullets were not turning to water. With the charge defeated and their leader dead, resistance collapsed and Albertville was liberated. Sadly, most of the hostages had already been killed. In honor of their first big victory, Hoare gave his unit the nickname the Wild Geese, after the Irish mercenaries who fought for the House of Stuart in exile. With Albertville liberated, they began the long march to Stanleyville. The mercenaries became the shock troops of the army, using speed and superior firepower to destroy much larger Simba forces. They also utilized terror, collecting the heads of dead rebels and sticking them to their jeeps. As the tide of the war seemed to turn against the Simbas, their terror campaign in the city had only gotten worse. There were mass executions every day, while the black elected mayor of Stanleyville was forced to stand naked in the public square while Simbas cut out his liver and ate it. This is honestly one of those wars you want no one to win, as both sides are just so terrible. This would be a tougher fight, however. Soviet weapons were flowing in, and communist Cubans were training the Simbas, led by none other than Che Guevara himself. By this point, the more ideological and utopian Che had fallen out with the more cynical and realistic Castro brothers. They decided to let him try and foment revolution around the globe. At least it kept him busy, and more importantly, out of Cuba. As the mercenaries and the Congolese army advanced, regular ambushes slowed their progress. The Simbas would allow the armed vehicles to drive by first. Then they would emerge from the bush to attack the trucks filled with soldiers that came after. You are trying to catch some sleep, but the potholes on this road are murder. Every time you think you are dropping off to the hum of the engine, another pothole shakes the lorry. As you grumble to your comrades, Jan pipes back. "You shouldn't sleep anyway, Runek, in case we run into another ambush." You're about to flip him off when the lorry is raked by gunfire. Screams and shouts echo from the rest of the convoy, then the familiar crackle of machine gun fire being returned. Jan is dead, his eyes staring blankly back at you and a surprised expression on his face. Those who survived leap out of the lorry to look for cover as bullets ricochet around you. A Congolese officer runs by, but is hit in the head and collapses to the floor. You spot a Simba firing from behind a tree. Raising your gun, you open fire and he falls back into the bush. Then the chanting begins, and they charge out of the jungle towards the convoy. Many fall to your bullets, but some get through, and the fighting goes hand to hand. As you are firing, one of them comes up on your blind spot. Only a shout from one of your comrades spares your life as he lunges forward with a machete. As you lie sprawled on the floor, he runs at you again with the machete raised. Frantically, you gun him down. Soon you hear the rumble of the jeeps as they come back to find out what's going on. The Simbas vanish back into the bush. As you try to process everything that's happened, the Cuban yells, "I told you, Castro's men were here. This is one of his lapdogs," as he waves a bloody book that must be a diary. As the Cuban starts kicking the corpse while yelling in Spanish, one of the Germans walks up to you smiling. "This reminds me of the good old days on the Eastern Front. We were advancing on Moscow when..." As he begins reminiscing, you wonder if all this is worth it, just to get enough cash to start a business back in Rhodesia. The heavens then opened and the convoy was reduced to a 10-mile-per-hour crawl as the roads turned into a muddy quagmire. Hit by more ambushes, Hoare admitted it was the most terrifying and harrowing experience of my life. 60 miles from Stanley, Hoare demanded that the Belgian officer in charge call a halt. They spent a miserable night in the rain, waiting for daybreak. By the time they reached Stanley, Belgian paratroopers had already landed, and the city was a war zone. 200 hostages had already been killed by the Simbas on the orders of the commanding witch doctor. Breaking through the rebel defences and entering the city, it was a street-by-street battle for control. Anti-communist Cubans, paid by the CIA, flew bombing raids on Simba strongholds. Finally, the city fell. 2,000 hostages had been saved from conditions almost worse than death. While the war would continue, the fall of Stanleyville was a turning point of the conflict. To the victor go the spoils. The 5th Commando Unit, and especially Hoare, became famous. While they had fought well, a large part of this was because the Belgian paratroopers' role was deliberately downplayed by the Belgian government. The only units happy to be photographed and chat to the press were the mercenaries. Hoare in particular was perfect for the media, a middle-aged World War II veteran with impeccable manners who protested that he fought for martial honour and not just for cash. He became an instant star. Soon, all the mercenaries were being portrayed as gentlemen adventurers. This covered up the fact that most of his force were criminals and ex-Nazis, who were certainly there for the money. For all their heroics, it must be remembered that for every town they liberated, they were also looting money, gold, diamonds, ivory, and anything else of value. Even in Stanleyville, Hoare let his men pillage at will. The wild geese blew open the vaults of every bank and confiscated the alcohol in every tavern in the city. 2 South Africans blasted open a safe with dynamite and disappeared with $65,000. Another said he was there to steal enough to open a garage back home, and eventually did so. There is also no getting round the fact that most of Hoare's men were massive racists, who shot first and asked questions later. One UN observer stated that, quote, anything black was killed indiscriminately, blindly, by Hoare's mercenaries, end quote. Hoare himself openly said, quote, killing communists is like killing vermin. Killing African nationalists is like killing animals. I don't like either of them. My men and I killed between 5,000 and 10,000 Congolese rebels during the 20 months I spent in the Congo. Hoare himself imposed a kind of rough justice on his men, though mostly he looked the other way. When one of his men raped and killed a Congolese girl, he was held down while Hoare shot off his big toes. Presumably, he didn't get the 5% disability payment. On a later television appearance in Great Britain, an indignant British brigadier spluttered that Hoare's methods were orthopedically unjustifiable. British generals never change. The rebels were on the back foot, but the arms kept flowing in from sympathetic African states, and the war raged on. Hoare, in mid-March, launched a successful land-water assault against rebel strongholds on the north shore of Lake Albert. His wild geese then struck out along the borders of Uganda and Sudan to cut Simba supply routes. When the rebels sought refuge across the border in Sudan, the wild geese pursued them and killed 80 Simbas, while also causing a major diplomatic incident. They didn't have it all their own way. The Cubans' trading was beginning to pay off for the rebels. Siegfried Müller narrowly survived an ambush in which most of the 40 vehicles in his column were destroyed. It was around this time that East German radio began referring to Hoare as that mad bloodhound Mike Hoare. The nickname stuck. Mad Mike next turned towards recapturing eastern Congo, the final stronghold of the Simbas. Told it would take 6 months to do this, Hoare calmly claimed that he could do it in 3 days. He launched a freshwater D-Day invasion of a rebel stronghold on the northeastern shore of Lake Tanganyika. His assault fleet, 6 21-foot powerboats, a 70-foot trawler, and 2 50-foot radar-equipped CIA-supplied swiftboats, shipped out after dusk on September the 24th, and by dawn on the 25th was moving up the middle of the lake out of sight of land. 200 men hit the beach up the coast, but soon ran into trouble and were pinned down for days. This would be the hardest fighting of the war for the 5th Commando. They had run into 2,000 rebels, trained and led by Che's Cubans. Hoare would later write that the enemy were very different from anything we'd ever met before. They wore equipment, employed normal field tactics, and answered to whistle signals. They were obviously being led by trained officers. With his forces pinned down on the beach, Hoare had to lead a land force to rescue them. 4 days of bloody fighting raged, with the anti-communist Cuban pilots relentlessly bombing the Simbas from above. On the 5th day, either the communist Cuban advisors abandoned the rebels or lost control of them, as they launched a huge human wave charge against the wild geese. With tired eyes, you scan the sight before you. After days of intense fighting, you are worn down to the bone, driven forward only by the thought of rescuing your comrades. Previously, the Simbas had been fighting like proper soldiers, making you pay for every step. Now, though, they line up en masse, drinking their dagger and listening to their witch doctors chanting spells. Raising your machine gun, you wait for the order to fire. Almost as one, the Simbas charge towards your lines, screaming their battle cry. Hoare raises his hand and says, "Steady." They're getting closer and closer. Still he says, "Steady." It feels like they are almost on top of you when he finally yells, "Fire!" They are so close that almost every shot counts. Hundreds fall motionless to the floor, while those who are wounded wail for help. Still you keep on firing, the barrel of your gun running hot. Then they can take the punishment no more. The Simbas begin to flee as you continue to pick them off. Che later blamed his failure on the Africans. "They did not know how to handle their weapons, and did not want to learn," he grumbled, calling the average Congolese soldier lazy and undisciplined, the poorest example of a fighter that I have ever come across. The back of the Simbas had now been broken. Che himself was almost caught by the wild geese, and soon left the Congo. Small groups of Simbas would fight on into the 1990s, but the movement as a whole had been crushed. Hoare, however, had lost his patron. Moise Tshombe had been overthrown by General Mobutu Sese Seko. He left the Congo, and shortly after the wild geese were disbanded. Mobutu would rename the state Zaire and turn into the ultimate kleptocratic dictator, only losing power in 1997. For close to a decade and a half, Hoare was out of the mercenary game. Nobody wanted to hire him as he was too notorious. Still, he was busy writing books about his experiences and was a consultant for the film Wild Geese, where Richard Burton played a white mercenary in Africa who was quite clearly based on Hoare. It's quite dated now, but worth watching, as Roger Moore had a starring role, and it's thanks to this movie that he later became James Bond. Hoare did much to create the idea of mercenaries being gentlemen adventurers, anti-heroes, battling the forces of global communism, in between womanizing. Still, Mad Mike was bored again, until he received an interesting offer for a new adventure. As the Cold War chilled the globe, Southern Africa had its very own local Cold War raging at the same time. Apartheid South Africa and its allies were ranged against black African states that opposed white minority rule. Both these Cold Wars were about to make the Seychelles their latest chess piece. Made up of 70 islands in the Indian Ocean, and mostly reliant on tourism, it didn't seem like a strategic place. However, its playboy president, James Jimmy Mancham, allowed South African planes to refuel at the national airport, making it a critical conduit to the outside world for a nation increasingly under sanctions. Those who opposed South Africa knew this too, and they started to conspire. Mancham was in the middle of a romantic tryst in the Savoy Hotel of London when he received a telephone call at, shall we say, an intimate moment, informing him there had been a coup back home. The grim socialist Prime Minister Albertville had seized power. South African flights were banned, opposition crushed, and a massive new Soviet embassy was being built. By May 1978, Mike Hoare was hired by a group of wealthy Seychelles exiles to overthrow Rene and restore Mancham. 2 years of clandestine plotting and shadowy meetings with the exiles, a powerful Kenyan politician, and South African security and military intelligence followed. Throughout this attempted coup, there's a strong element of an old man trying to relive his glory days, take into account that Mad Mike Hoare would be 63 by the time the coup occurred. His plan was right out of a Hollywood B-movie. The mercenaries would be disguised as members of a rugby and social club, the Ye Ancient Order of Froth Blowers. The name was stolen from a 1920s English social club. I'll let Hoare himself explain the rest. We were a Johannesburg drinking club. We met formally once a year in our favourite pub in Bramfontein. We played rugby. Once a year, we organised a holiday for our members. We obtained special charter rates. Last year, we went to Mauritius. In the best traditions of the original AOFB, we collected toys for the underprivileged kids and distributed them to orphanages. I made sure the toys were as bulky as possible and weighed little. Rugger footballs were ideal. These were packed into the special baggage above the false bottom to compensate for the weight of the weapon. Once on the main island, they would join a local revolt organised by the exiles and would help seize key points. Then Kenya would invade to restore order, in quotation marks, and put Mansion back in power. His team was a mixture of ex-South African and Rhodesian military, former mercenaries from the Congo, and 2 bizarre choices: an Italian actor from the Wild Geese, Giulio Bonetta, and Sven Forsell, an Austrian former opera singer turned aspiring filmmaker who wanted to do a documentary about mercenaries. I have no idea why Hoare thought it was a good idea to bring them. The coup still might have been successful, but for the jaw-dropping stupidity of one of his men, Kevin Beck. He claimed to be a former Special Forces soldier and member of South African intelligence. Judging by his behaviour, it seems more likely he was a complete fantasist. The problem was, Beck liked to drink. Or 2, or 3, or 4.
Got a map of scars and a heart made of brass. Every wrong turn made me hit the gas. I'm a high roller.
Together, you march towards the Seychelles customs. Hoare, yourself, and the other mercenaries, in your matching team blazers, slacks and tote bags, your automatic weapons stored safely inside. Everything has been going smoothly so far. Apart from Beck. He was downing whiskies like no one's business throughout the entire flight. Now he is staggering and slurring his words. If you can just get him through customs, then hopefully everything will be okay. As you're wade through the nothing to declare section by the unsuspecting Seychelles customs officers, you look around and realise you can't see Beck. Looking back, you realise in horror he's mistakenly joined the queue for something to declare. Frantically, you try to get his attention, but he's too drunk to notice. And then, his bags are being opened. The inspector pulls out the AK-47 hidden inside, looking stunned. There's silence, and then Beck blurts out,
"I don't know what that is, but there are 44 more of them in the bags outside."
With your cover blown, you start pulling out your AK-47s, while the German shouts,
"Everyone, get on the floor!"
The inspector tries to make a run for it, but you gun him down. The cat was out of the bag, or at least the AK-47s were. 2 years of planning down the drain, thanks to a drunken buffoon. Discovered, the froth-blowers pulled out their weapons and opened fire. All hell broke out, and the customs officer with the rifle went down wounded, though not fatally. South African ex-paratrooper Johann Fritz was shot through the heart by a stray bullet, killed by friendly fire from his own men. He would be the only fatality among the mercenaries. After the shooting stopped, Hoare's men took control of the entire terminal, which was barely defended. Seychelles airport staff were herded together and told to sit tight. 2 of the froth-blowers went into the control tower and took over. The original plan had been to meet up with their local backers and only then become the tip of the spear for a general revolt. Now, though, they decided to attack the main barracks right away. It didn't go well. An anti-aircraft gun, mounted just inside the barracks perimeter, opened up on them to terrifying effect. They had to fall back for cover into the surrounding bush, and Aubrey Brooks, a Special Forces man originally from Rhodesia, was badly wounded in the thigh. He lost contact with his comrades and was eventually captured. They controlled the airport, but nothing else. Now they faced a counterattack from regime forces. They blocked the main road as armoured cars tried to smash their way through, setting one on fire with a Molotov cocktail, but only after spending 30 minutes looking for matches. It was just that kind of coup. In the midst of all this chaos, an Air India aeroplane chose to land, despite being warned that the airport was a war zone. First of all, it was almost shot down by anti-aircraft guns. Then, there was a sickening bang as a parked truck caught the undercarriage, but the lurching aircraft managed to stay on course, the engines screeching in reverse thrust. 3 feet closer to the undercarriage, and the aircraft would have certainly have cartwheeled, killing everyone on board. The plane contained a number of important Zimbabwean officials, so President Rene was reluctantly persuaded to allow the aircraft to refuel and leave, as long as the mercenaries didn't get on board. In a stroke of luck for the froth-blowers, the Indian pilot informed them that, "I don't want to know how many men are in your group. That's your business. But I can carry an extra 50 passengers." He agreed to fly them to South Africa. During the flight, a blonde girl from Zimbabwe and one of the mercenaries struck up such a rapport that they ended up joining the Mile High Club. A stewardess later said, "They were so polite and gentlemanly that it just did not seem as if we were being hijacked." It was an appropriately comical ending to the coup. Under pressure from the international community, and now denying any involvement in the coup at all, the South Africans arrested all the mercenaries and convicted them. But Hoare, notorious as he was, would be imprisoned for 33 months. After his release, his mercenary days were now definitely over. Devoting himself to writing books about his experiences and going back to accounting, he lived in England for a time before moving back to South Africa, where he died in 2020, aged 100. Hoare's legacy is a complex one. On one hand, he undoubtedly saved many lives in the Congo and helped crush the brutal Simba movement. On the other, his men were mostly thieves and adventurers and ex-Nazis who undoubtedly committed multiple war crimes. The less said about his Seychelles adventure, the better. Really, the best that can be said about him is that he did it all with a certain style and old-world charm. At least for himself, he was fighting for the love of war and adventure, rather than just for the cash. Compared to the modern-day mercenaries of Blackwater, XE, or Wagner, this warlord of the Congo appears a quaint figure from a gentler age. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, subscribe, leave a review, or tell a friend. In our next episode, we head back to the Transvaal in 1880, as Britain is defeated in one of its most disastrous wars. Join me for a tale of incompetence, an army that can't shoot straight, and a Boer leader who, when his thumb was blown off, tried to heal it by thrusting it into a goat's stomach. It can only be the First Boer War. See you next time for more Forgotten Wars.